He didn't love you. He studied you. He watched how you spoke, how you laughed when you were nervous, how your voice dropped every time you apologized for taking up space. He noticed the way you avoided conflict, the way you twisted your own thoughts into softer versions so you wouldn't sound too much. He listened when you told stories from your past, but not to comfort you. He was collecting data about your fears, your longings, your soft spots, the cracks you tried to keep hidden, even from yourself. He didn't fall for you. He built a mirror out of your wounds, and then he stepped inside that mirror and made you believe it was love. Thomas Erikson explains that deep narcissists don't connect through genuine emotion. They connect through analysis, through reflection. They become a perfect emotional echo, not to understand you, but to gain access. Access to your trust, access to your attachment, access to your loyalty, even when it's not deserved. What you experienced wasn't love. It was emotional surveillance disguised as intimacy. It was mirroring. And that's what made it feel so powerful and so familiar, because you weren't seeing him. You were seeing yourself through the eyes of someone who finally made you feel visible. It felt like home, because he spoke your language. He said the right things, held your gaze just long enough, matched your rhythm, mirrored your values, agreed with your fears. And when you talked about your childhood, the abandonment, the emotional coldness, the guilt of always feeling like too much, he didn't flinch. He listened, nodded, offered just enough empathy to make you feel safe. But it wasn't safety. It was mapping. He wasn't bonding with you. He was tracing the contours of your pain, learning what made you open up, what made you stay, what made you shrink. And when he had enough, he stopped showing up. Not physically, emotionally. Became distant, colder, less responsive. He said less, but made you feel like you were too loud. He gave less, but made you feel like you were asking too much. He started pulling back, not with explanations, but with silence. In you started trying harder, thinking you did something wrong, that maybe you changed, that maybe you were the problem, but you didn't change. You just ran out of new data for him to collect. You stopped feeding the illusion, and that's when the illusion stopped feeding you. You weren't loved. You were scanned, processed, reflected back in a form that made you believe you were finally understood. But now, you understand something deeper. You were never truly met, only studied. And when the studying ended, so did the connection, because it was never built on real presence. It was built on mirroring. Thomas Erikson writes that a deep narcissist's greatest strength is their ability to perform emotional resonance without emotional risk. They make you feel seen, but never actually see you. They speak like they care, but never feel what you feel. They touch like they understand, but pull away when you bleed, because your pain was never theirs to hold. It was just a tool, a blueprint, a manual on how to keep you close and compliant. And what hurts the most is that it worked because it looked like love, sounded like love, moved like love, until it didn't. Until the mirror cracked, and all that was left was you alone, asking why you suddenly felt so invisible. But the truth is, you were always alone in that connection, because he never truly joined you. He only reflected what he thought would make you stay. And now, you're waking up. You're starting to see that the most dangerous kind of love is the one that feels tailor-made for your wounds, because that kind of love doesn't heal you. It keeps you trapped, hooked, dependent. It convinces you that you've finally found someone who understands, when what you've really found is someone who uses understanding as a way to control. It didn't start as dependency. It started as comfort. He was warm, attentive, curious. He asked questions no one else asked. He remembered things you forgot you even said. He made you feel like you mattered, and not just in a general way, in a precise, tailored way. Like he saw something in you that no one else had ever taken the time to see. You thought that was intimacy, but it was investment, strategic investment, because he knew what he was building, a version of himself that aligned perfectly with your emotional hunger. The hunger to be known, to be heard, to finally rest in someone's presence without performing. And that is where the dependency began. Not with neediness, not with obsession, with hope. Hope that this finally was real, that you were safe, that someone had chosen you not just for your surface, but for your depths. So you opened more. You revealed the parts you usually hide. You shared the wounds no one else could name. You became raw, honest, exposed, and in return, he mirrored understanding, validation.com. He made you feel stronger, but only when he was near. And that was the trap, because slowly, without noticing, you began tying your emotional regulation to his availability. When he was present, you felt grounded. When he was distant, you felt like you couldn't breathe, but you didn't call it dependency. You called it love, connection, bonding. You thought the intensity was proof of depth, but it wasn't. It was imbalance, because he wasn't dependent on you. He was feeding on you. And when he sensed that you were fully in, that your nervous system now responded to his rhythms, he changed. Subtly, almost imperceptibly. He texted less, praised you less, pulled away just enough to make you panic. And in that panic, you started working harder, trying to fix something you didn't break, trying to win back a version of him that never really existed. But he didn't panic. He watched, assessed, evaluated your reactions, because the more you chased, the more power he gained. And that's what it had always been about. Power disguised as connection, control disguised as chemistry. He had mirrored your dreams only to turn them into a leash, and now that you were tethered, he could control the pace, the warmth, the silence, the punishment, and you. You thought it was your fault that maybe you were too emotional, too needy, too intense, but you weren't. You were just hooked on the reflection he created, on the fantasy he carefully constructed from your history. You weren't in love, you were in trauma, repetition, hoping that this time someone would stay. Someone would choose you, someone would see you and not leave. But he was never there to stay. He was there to feed. And the moment you stopped giving him the validation he craved, the worship, the softness, the effort, he vanished. Not completely, just enough to trigger your abandonment wound. Just enough to keep you chasing. And every time you ran back to him, it confirmed what he already believed, that he had control, that you were his, that the version of himself he created worked, until it didn't, until you saw the pattern, until your body couldn't take it anymore, until the anxiety became unbearable and the silence too loud, until you realized that what you were calling love was actually emotional addiction. And now you're waking up. Slowly, painfully, but clearly, you're starting to question the story, to name the illusion, to see that the version of him you were addicted to never truly existed, and that the person you need to return to is yourself. When the mirror breaks, it's not loud. There's no crash, no dramatic shattering, just a quiet ache, a dull silence. A moment where you finally see what you didn't want to see, that it was never real, that the love you felt so deeply wasn't shared. It was reflected, that he didn't feel what you felt. He performed it, rehearsed it, crafted it, not to deceive you maliciously, but to get what he needed. Control, admiration, power. And now that the illusion is gone, what you feel isn't just heartbreak, it's disorientation. Because when someone mirrors you that perfectly, you lose track of who you are. Your identity gets fused with the image they created. You begin to define yourself through their eyes. Their attention becomes your validation. Their withdrawal becomes your shame. And when that mirror cracks, you're not just grieving him. You're grieving the version of yourself you became to be loved by him. The soft-spoken version, the agreeable version, the endlessly patient version, the version who shrunk her voice to avoid tension, who smiled when she wanted to cry, who stayed when every instinct screamed to leave. That version wasn't fake. She was survival. She was the part of you trained to believe that love must be earned through performance. And now, she's tired, because the mirror didn't just reflect your wounds. It required you to relive them, to replay old scripts, to reopen old doors. And you did it. Again and again. Hoping this time the ending would be different. That if you just loved better, softer, harder, more clearly, he would finally see you, choose you, stay. But he didn't, because he was never truly with you, only with the reflection. And when you started seeing through it, when you began to question, to ask for more, to stop explaining, the mirror stopped working. And he stepped away, not because you did something wrong, but because the illusion could no longer be maintained. You grew, you woke up, you started naming things he preferred to keep blurry. And that's when everything changed. Because mirrors can't survive light. Truth shatters performance. And the moment you stopped playing your role, he had no more script, no more lines, no more power. And now, it's quiet, lonely, heavy, but also honest. For the first time, you're not lying to yourself, not pretending it was love, not romanticizing the pain, not calling it passion when it was punishment. You're just here, with the pieces, with the grief, with the truth. And in that raw, broken place, you begin to rebuild. Not with mirrors, with realness, with clarity, with boundaries, with self-respect. You no longer want to be mirrored. You want to be met. And that desire, that shift, means you're healing. Slowly, deeply, silently, but healing. And one day, you'll look back and see it clearly. That it wasn't love, it was a mirror. And the day it broke was the day you came home to yourself. The silence wasn't peace, it was strategy. It was the most polished form of control, because silence makes you doubt yourself, makes you lean in. Explain more, apologize first. When he went silent, you thought he needed space, time, patience. You thought he was processing, healing, being mature. But he wasn't. He was punishing you, not openly, not directly, quietly, subtly, calculatedly. He used the silence to shift the emotional burden onto you. And it worked, because you filled in the gaps. You created reasons, you softened your truth, you questioned your tone. And in that space, you became smaller. Not because you were wrong, but because you wanted to fix something he never acknowledged. That's the power of strategic silence. It doesn't raise its voice, it doesn't break plates. It just leaves you alone with your own insecurities, and watches you turn them into guilt. Thomas Erikson explains that deep narcissists use silence not to solve conflict, but to avoid accountability. Because silence allows them to maintain superiority. They never have to explain, never have to admit fault, never have to engage in real dialogue. They just disappear emotionally, mentally, and let you do the emotional labor. And you did it. You replayed conversations, wondered if you were too harsh, too demanding, too sensitive. You tried to reconnect, to repair, to find a softer way to say what hurt. But he didn't meet you there. He waited until you came back softer, more apologetic, less sure of what you felt. And then, he reappeared. Not with warmth, with control. Subtle control. The kind that made you feel like the peace was your reward for being easy again. And that's when you learned his silence wasn't absence, it was precision. It was a way to reset the dynamic, to make sure you understood the cost of speaking your truth, to train you, so next time, you wouldn't risk it. You'd stay quiet. You'd say it differently. You'd bury it. And that's how it became normal. The cycles, the walking on eggshells, the emotional resets. You stopped expressing freely, not because you stopped feeling, but because you learned that your feelings came with a price. Disconnection, withdrawal, coldness, so you adapted, smiled more, asked less, rationalized his behavior. You became the peacekeeper, but the peace wasn't peace. It was submission. It was the erosion of your voice, your clarity, your safety. And now that you're outside of it, you feel the weight. The silence lingers, not just his, yours. Because now you realize how often you silenced yourself just to be tolerated. But that's ending. Because you're done mistaking silence for stability. You're done believing that love requires suppression. You're done rewarding someone for punishing your truth. Now, you're choosing discomfort over distortion, clarity over quiet. And even though it hurts, it's real. And real is what heals, not silence, not control, not fear, realness, expression, self-respect. That's your new voice. And it doesn't need to whisper anymore. You were never too much. You were just surrounded by people who wanted you smaller, quieter, simpler, easier to digest, easier to manage. You weren't loud. You were honest. You weren't dramatic. You were hurting. You weren't unstable. You were responding to emotional neglect. And the more you expressed that truth, the more they labeled you. Difficult, intense, sensitive, emotional. They didn't use those words to describe you. They used them to contain you, to shrink you back into the version that served them best. The agreeable one, the silent one, the soft one who would rather self-destruct than disappoint. But not anymore. Now you see it. The pattern, the conditioning, the system that taught you to fear your own voice, that trained you to believe your love was only valuable when it was effortless, when it didn't inconvenience, when it didn't come with boundaries. But you were never here to be effortless. You were never meant to be latent, born to feel deeply, to speak bravely, to exist in your full emotional range. And anyone who makes you feel like that's too much is simply not enough. Thomas Erikson reminds us that deep narcissists fear emotional clarity because clarity can't be controlled, and you have become clear about who you are, clear about what you need, clear about what you will no longer accept. And that clarity, that new, steady flame inside of you, is not rage, it's not revenge, it's not bitterness, it's your return. The return to your center, the self you abandoned in pieces every time you chose silence over self-respect. But now, you're whole, not healed, not perfect but present, and present is enough. You don't need to be lighter, softer, smaller. You need to be true. Because truth is peace. And peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of alignment. And now, you are aligned. With yourself, with your voice, with your worth. So the next time someone calls you too much, remember this. You were never too much. You were just in the wrong room. And now that you've left the mirror behind, you'll never again confuse reflection for love. Because what you want now is real, steady, honest, and this time, you'll recognize it because you finally know what it's not.